exact same thing again. There's a sky tower. Clear sky. I'll try and zoom as far into it as I can without it being shaky, people. It's on a tripod, but what is that? Bloody missed it again.
It's a pity when they get some of your subscribers from them, so that when they pay them to put it into it.
I mean, it's massive. That is big. Because you look at it and away in the distance, and then you bring it to the fore, and it's just. Well, 4th August, we've got it back again. Or 5th August. What's the day's date? 5th August. Same thing, 2 tails. Same position in the sky. Definitely not a plane. There's a sky tower. We'll lose it soon underneath the clouds. You tell me that's a plane. That's still there. The tails are facing up and down the way. So I mean that tells you it's not a plane. Look. Look. Here.
Oh aye.
Tell Hannah I'm recording. There it's lost behind the cloud anyway.
And there is no prisoner more pathetic, no slave more pitiable than a prisoner or a slave who thinks that he or she is a free person. We are not. And it's high time all of us were aware of this fact. There are those who walk amongst us as human beings, but who are more than human beings. There are such things as gods, and they walk amongst us. They control our destiny. They control us through newspapers. They control us through money. And they control us through religion and spiritual confusion and
There we go. There, look, check it out. What is that, guys? What the? What? Whoa. Hello, hello. Excuse me. Look, oh, see his eye too? What the? What was that? Is that just a camera? I don't think so, guys.
Wilbur Allen, fotógrafo de National Geographic, captó varias imágenes con tecnología de última generación, evidencia que sorprende no solo por su calidad, también porque podrían demostrar que en los cielos ocurren hechos casi imperceptibles para el ojo humano, pero captados gracias a las últimas tecnologías. Esta es la historia. El 4 de julio de 2013 en los Estados Unidos, impresionantes imágenes de un fenómeno desconocido fueron captadas por Wilbur Allen, quien desde el 2008 es fotógrafo profesional de la prestigiosa revista National Geographic. Esta secuencia de fotografías fueron tomadas en el área de Sedona, en el estado de Arizona. Estas extrañas luces fueron descritas por Wilbur Allen, quien aseguró que el objeto luminoso volaba rápidamente hasta que se detuvo de manera intempestiva en el aire. Incluso el fotógrafo de National Geographic
into anything over the past, since the 1970s, or even before, back to the 50s, before NASA even existed. The astronomy community has tried to persuade the public that comets are really nothing to worry about. They're just those little puffy things out there, nothing to worry about. And everything in our history tells us that these things, the big ones, the first good electrical interaction with this comet with the planet is going to actually be with with planet Earth. And this is January 15th, so we'll probably get our first reading of the strength of this comet.
In other words, there's going to be a plasma discharge across interstellar space. And there's also a comet coming by that's going to be about 197 meters across. They say 5,000 miles above the surface of the Earth, but every time they recalculate, it gets closer and closer. It used to be 100,000 miles, which is, a little less than half the distance to the moon, or 1/2 LD, or lunar distance. And now it's getting closer and closer, but they stopped 2.5 months ago releasing the data. It appears that the military and the government don't want us to know about near-Earth objects anymore. It's now considered all classified. Why is that?
Well, yeah, it's a program. If you look at what I'd call the commercial side of NASA, the part headed by David Morrison, that's the part that they feed to the public. And once David Morrison said in public that they don't have any equipment. And I was like, wait a minute, you're the near-Earth object resource group for NASA, and you don't have any equipment? But on Haleakala in Maui, Hawaii, the military has some of the most incredible optical and infrared astronomical equipment in the world, and it's hooked to the biggest supercomputer in the world for calculations. But like you say, this information is not to get out to the public.
It's all blackout. We have, for example, IRAS, which is the infrared telescope, WISE, which is a wide-angle space telescope for looking at infrared. We've got the Chandra X-ray telescope. We have the stereoscopic telescopes looking at solar activity. We have the South Pole telescopes, etc. And none of this information is coming out to the public about whether there's near-Earth objects out in the Oort cloud, like Sedna that was identified a few years ago. This is very disturbing because it will affect the Earth. And some of these nearest objects are whipping by at incredible high velocity, 35,000 miles an hour, and they're not little. They're several hundred meters in size or larger. This object that was posted up, which we said passed the sniff test, but we can't find anything more about it, about this Canadian astronomer and astronaut that said there was an 800-meter object that was heading toward Antarctica.
Those things, it's almost like you got to grab them when you see them, because when you go back, they're not there, and that's all you're going to ever see on it.
Yeah, apparently somebody said they saw it, but I never saw what's called a screenshot. That's also something missing. No screenshot of the actual data, although I've seen video clips of this astronaut talking about near-Earth objects and very upset, very energized over the fact we don't have a very advanced, collaborative, worldwide defense of Earth like Lyndon LaRouche talks about space program. I know Space Command, which is U.S. and Canadian, basically has very little participation from even the European space agencies and none from Russia or China. And as a result, we're not really presenting information to the typical scientists at universities or feeding back information to people like yourself that can convey it or explain it to the public so they can understand that, yes, space weather and these space objects are dangerous. The things that can end life on Earth are plasma effects, gravitonic effects, coronal mass ejections, and giant objects that whip by our planet that ended the life of the dinosaurs 62 million years ago.
Right, exactly, and I like that you're mentioning that something I've said all along, that these objects don't have to hit Earth. No. They can pass by and cause a lot more damage. The bigger ones can cause tremendous damage, and they don't hit us at all.
Well, they could do something like cause our magnetic field to flip or collapse temporarily. And that could allow cosmic background radiation. You could have a coronal mass ejection triggered by the sun that could hit us. You're using gravity as an accelerator, the same way these planetoids or planetary-sized objects could be accelerating and whipping comets into the inner solar system periodically if their orbits cross. Billions of these comet-sized snowballs out in the deep space in the Oort cloud. Is that a possibility?
Well, exactly, yeah. We don't know what's out there. I think NASA has a good reading on it, and I have to clarify this, too, that I have defined what I call Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 science. The public, or what the public thinks is top layer of science in the world, NASA, etc., is really Tier 2. And that's the garbage science that's passed off to the public, which is very little. Pretty pictures from the Hubble Space Telescope every now and then. Tier 1 science is funded by groups which include the people who run the International Monetary Fund and the World Banking and what I call secret societies, the people that really control what's going on. And throughout history, real leaders of the world have always known they have to keep the public stupid about science and engineering to maintain power. So when I say NASA knows, I would say that Tier 1 layer, that upper layer, that's I would call it the military side of NASA, they know, they have information, but they're not passing it down to the other second layer scientists or to the public.
I remember, I'm going to quote one of my PhD colleagues at high-level security clearance, and he said many years ago, back in the mid-'90s, he said to me that 4% of the knowledge is at Tier 2 that goes to the levels of tenured university professors in physics and astrophysics, etc. In any university from Cambridge to around the world, 96% of the sum total of advanced knowledge is on a need-to-know basis, and you're only invited in there in these secret orders to have specific compartmentalized information. And some of this is very ancient, and it's extremely well-funded because, for example, the money that's been printed up by, let's say, the Federal Reserve is trillions and trillions of dollars in projects that people just can't even imagine exist, but they do. It's not science fiction. They exist. And some of the stuff is even open, like the WISE telescope the infrared telescopes got IRAS, the conjoint project between Germany and America to put a Boeing jet up with a infrared telescope of 40 to 50,000 feet to see at that level there's very little tropospheric interference with infrared analysis of deep space objects. They know far more than they're saying, and then you just have to look at their behavior. Why are they not telling the public? Because they're not preparing us for major Earth changes, plasma effects, gravitonic effects, volcanic effects, even effects on the magnetosphere that could cause the South Atlantic anomaly to cause a major collapse that could have major effects on the oceans or on populations like in Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo, Brazil, where if that descended to the ground, it would kill people almost instantly. And people are not aware of this. They just start going to work and thinking everything's fine. And the global elite don't even tell you that when the South Pole anomaly hits, if it gets lowered into the range where commercial aircraft are flying, they would lose control of their aircraft because the background space radiation would fry their integrated circuits of their airline control and their communications. It's just, they don't tell anybody anything, do they?
No, and that's really true. So we're living like laboratory rats, if you will, and it's a bad comparison, but it's really true.
Yeah.
And I just saw today, I was looking up on the comet C2012S1, and that if you look on Google, which is a controlled search engine, you come up with Scientific American as the top thing, and you would think, gee, that must be the top scientific information on this object, but it's all fluffy duff, mumbo jumbo, and it really, they absolutely don't talk about this thing coming near Mars. Why would you not talk about this thing coming near Mars when that's a major event? Mars is going to be in the coma of this thing. It's going to come close. It's going to change the orbit. But they talk about it like it's just going to pass by, and they don't even mention Mars.
One of the things that's going to stop a lot of this is citizen astronomers, citizen scientists can do all kinds of experiments, like when we had talked about Stan Dale with his gravitonic experiments. Citizen astronomers have some pretty powerful scopes and technologies that can look at the sun, can look at deep space, and are going to start identifying anomalies that they're going to start adding one and one together. And when they look at your models, the models that you've put out scientifically that explain this, it's going to blow the lid off the fact that the governments are conspiring to keep the public in the dark at our peril. And that's the big part, is it's at our peril. Peril of crops, populations, communication systems, power grids, coastal areas, all kinds of things. Because if you have, say, an ocean strike of a large asteroid or comet, you're going to have a tsunami half a mile high. If you have this story, which we said passed the sniff test, of a 800-meter comet striking Antarctica, if it hit the Ross Ice Shelf or the northern ice shelf in Antarctica, you could have major effects on the oceans of the world. But they're not going to tell us anything, and they're going to say everything's fine, and the ether of normalcy is permeating the population to tell us, just go back to sleep, everything's fine, you're not going to have a Carrington event that would cause the fires of papers by somebody's telegraph machine to go on fire, or rail ties to burn 150 years ago. That couldn't happen again. Of course, these events happen on a century basis regularly from the sun. This is nothing anomalous, and it's not a millennial or decamillennial event. It's something that happens on a century basis. Yeah, exactly. But it's a comet like this that could come in, and the people look up in the sky, and imagine this comet, if it produces what they are predicting, and which I think it can do, in the daylight. You see something 15 times brighter than the full moon. Wow. And stretching across the sky with tails wheeling around and zapping electrical discharges off to little objects in space. And people can see this. Now, okay, you're the military trying to say, okay, now that's a fluffy little snowball up there, boys and girls. You know, it's just going to blow the lid off everything. And that's why... now, here's a good example. Whenever there's a comet, like Comet Ellen, and there was all kinds of hype and misinformation, and there were people jumping up and down, and all kinds of controlled websites giving misinformation, it'd be the end of the world. What's interesting is there's none of that, none at all with this comet. And a lot of those sites, I'd say the majority, are very controlled. So the controlled... the end of the world is going to happen with this comet. Those websites are quiet as a church. The other thing is, too, a lot of these issues have to do with energy,
And one of the biggest controlling factors on the public today is world energy. What I've been teaching for a long time is there's a tremendous amount of energy, electrical energy, passing by Earth, and we know how to tap into it. I know how to do this, but
Yeah.
you and the Black Ops people, I get to talk to them occasionally, and I had a naval physicist come up to me one day. I was giving a talk in 2003. And I had mentioned that the naval submarines are using bimetal strips as power, and that's the way they can derive power for their propellers and go run silent, run deep type of mode. And he came up to me after the talk and he says, "You can't talk about this anymore." He says, "You figured out what we're doing, but you can't talk about it anymore." And then he said, "You know, I'm amazed at what you're doing." He said, "Just doing what you're doing."
Yeah, in other words, what you're talking about is energy from a vacuum. In other words, the vortex, the dark field energy matter, that literally flows around the Earth and literally creates the substance of space-time, is literally infinite energy, and there's no need for energy shortage, just the same way as we had Professor Corsi on the first hour on Monday this week, on the 8th, talking about the abiotic oil scam that was proven by the Nazi Germans back in the 1930s and 40s that there's no shortage of oil, but oil is a minor portion of the energy needs of the planet. We could have plasma distribution networks, tokamak fusion reactors. I know from my sources that we can use helium-3 fusion reactors that would produce no radioisotopes and no byproducts and would not be dangerous, and they can be miniaturized as well. There's just no need for either pollution, energy shortages, which is the currency of the planet. The currency is not gold or silver or dollars or even electronic currency. It's energy. Energy is the currency of every culture.
And if you look at, like, say you go buy a hot dog today, how much of that hot dog price is energy to make it, to process it, to grow the corn, to get fed the beef or whatever, and you look right down the line. I did an analysis one time in transportation, in the grocer, the people have to drive to go buy it. The cost of that hot dog is 80 to 90% energy.
Yeah,
and there's about
less than 10% is less than 10% is anything else.
Yeah, and so you're paying these astronomical prices for things. Well, of course there's going to be economic chaos. How can you sustain when one branch of the society, which should be a small kind of pimple, like communications is another example. These should be small pimples on the side of our overall economy, yet they're the main central core of the economy. What's wrong with this picture, you know? Of course we can't be sustainable. We can't have a sustainable economy, and people are working 2 jobs just to try and make ends meet. Well, it's not working.
Well, we need also these ideas that you mentioned about energy sources, so we can do projects like geoengineer the planet to create things like the WAPA North American Energy and Water, to literally change the planetary safety areas so it's safe to have populations in areas where there won't be in danger of a tsunami, an earthquake, or other things, and to get away from old nuclear technology, which is patently dangerous.
It's terrible. People just have no idea how dangerous nuclear is. Not only the accidents, but the waste that we have stored, hundreds and hundreds of casks of radioactive waste stored around nuclear power plants, and someday, most of them have to be cooled. And so there's a point of no return in which you have to produce more and more energy simply to cool the spent fuel.
Yeah.
And if that reactor ever goes down, those things are going to melt.
You get 50 years of energy and 5 billion years of pollution.
Yeah, it is not a good deal.
No, bad, and it also costs more than any other form of energy. So, Professor McKenny, I want to move on to the topic of the people want to know about Planet X. They want to know, firstly, I don't like to call it Planet X because we know there's many objects that are coming into our solar system. I have lots of information that indicates that the powers that be know that there's going to be major changes to our planet. The one that I've been told recently is, and confirmed over pretty years, is that any kind of planetary effect from a sister star to our sun, which would probably be a red dwarf, would be a plasma effect, which fits in with your thesis. It doesn't have to come in within 55 million miles of Earth in order to have major effects on the planet. And the people don't grasp that the government's purposely hiding this data, whatever it is, because I don't know the dates, but I can tell you the evidence that I've seen and information suggests that there's not only comets and asteroids, these big rocks from space, but there's also planetoid-sized objects that could be coming in, or dwarf stars that can have major periodic effects. There's some pretty good evidence that every 3,600 years there's a what I call a sub-extinction level event, a major Earth change event that occurs, triggered up by an object that approaches near our inner solar system, and it may well be a dwarf star or one of these large planetoid-like objects, but it could be simply plasma discharges that produce a lot of these effects. Can you expand on that and tell us what your theories are and what data is out there?
The 3,600 year time frame.
Yes, and any of these cycles that are out there, because there's a bunch of cycles.
Yeah, the 3,600 year ago time frame was when Venus, the comet, came through and became the planet Venus. About 4,200 years ago, Hale-Bopp was here again and had a different orbit. We think that that orbit that it had before was Earth crossing. The one it has now is actually Earth crossing. But at any rate, those are two events that we know about.
Oh, really? So Venus was actually a large planetoid that actually came in and was captured in an orbit.
By Jupiter, and that's what the Velikovsky story that is poo-pooed by science. But what I found is very real. It's very, very real.
Oh, yeah, it's spinning in the opposite direction. You look at it and say, oh, this doesn't make sense. Every other planet's spinning in the opposite direction to Venus. And when you look at the nature of the size of the planet and the way it's behaving, it doesn't behave like any of the other near-Earth object planets in the inner solar system, does it?
No, there was an analysis done by a chemist, by the way, name is Newell, and he analyzed the atmosphere of Venus, and he said, this is a new planet. He says, all of these chemicals are very harsh chemicals which have a lifetime.
We know that the volcanism on Earth and the destruction of Thera that destroyed the Minoans, we know that the debris that fell and all the environmental changes that occurred for the, quote, plagues of Egypt fall specifically and in scientifically valid order, what you'd expect in terms of telluric currents driving the insects and the snakes out of the ground, etc. Something is really afoot here, and I think the globalists and the scientists in this category 1 science are trying to hide it from the public in terms of the approach of a dwarf star, either most likely a red dwarf or an object that has orbital objects around it and debris, and that this object is coming into our inner solar system and it's going to cause some havoc. And the globalists are building underground cities at an enormous pace. They're absolutely determined to get a new financial complete control matrix order over, quote, the civilian population, not because they're trying to save us, but because they don't want us to interfere with their continuity of civilization and government plans. I really believe that they're expecting an extinction level event, and they're trying to hide the fact that they've selected out specific individuals to be seed stock, like the Sakhalin Island super seed vault, and that they're getting ready, not telling the public. And that's why they want to have a global control system like the current administration with Obama and administrations in other countries like China, which they've supported the communist regime there. And at the same time, they're keeping the public like mushrooms in the dark and feeding us, you know what. So
exactly.
So
that's a good analysis, and it's I would say somewhere in there you're about 99.99% right on all of that.
Yeah. Well, my sources are.
The question is timing.
I took care of scientists going to McMurdo Bay back in the mid-'90s. I have contacts in the South Pole Telescope, contacts that sent me information from IRAS and other sources. I know that this infrared object can be picked up with infrared telescopy, X-ray telescopy, and radio telescopy, such as the Arecibo. They know it's coming in. I don't know the exact dates, but I do know it has orbital objects coming around it, which include planetary and comet-sized objects. What you're saying is that the Velikovsky theory is that Venus was a object that was coming in, that was literally in the orbit of this passing dwarf star and was captured by the orbit of, by the gravitational field of Jupiter and the Sun, and therefore rotates in the opposite direction because it wasn't originally a, if you want to call it a Sol, which is the name of our sun, solar object. It was actually a captured planetary object that's in a much earlier state of development.
Absolutely, yeah. My belief on Venus was that Velikovsky was exactly right, and that Venus and Hale-Bopp were companions. And Venus went one way, Hale-Bopp went the other way. They both had interactions with Jupiter around 4,200 years ago, and it took Venus about 600 years working its way through the solar system to finally become the planet. It passed by Mars, ripped the atmosphere and oceans off of Mars, and when it passed by Earth, we got a pretty good lambasting there twice. According to the Mayans, we know that those two events were 54 years apart. We know a lot about this. And then eventually Venus worked its way in, and that's by a process I call tail drag, the drag of the tail on the comet. In the plasma discharge comet model, my comet model shows that the nucleus of the comet is pulling in the tail material, and that creates a drag on the nucleus, which changes its orbit into a more circular orbit. So at any rate, this whole process is explained, and but that's what my vision of Venus is, and it's brand new. NASA cannot, they've got their little rover on Mars, and they just made an announcement saying, well, gee, there must have been water, but it had to be billions of years ago. And then you look at Mars, it's got pristine little riverbeds that are like the day they had water in them. You have erosion on the side of Olympus Mons. You have sloughing off of big chunks of material off the side of the volcano of Olympus Mons, which would have been due to an ocean there. And NASA goes, well, we think there might have been water, you know?
Well, if you look at it, they look like a swimming pool with the water drained out. You look at it, you see rivers, you see canals. These are not man-made canals. These are canals caused by the natural flow of water on the planet. So the planet obviously had a cataclysmic event that ripped off its atmosphere and water.
And recently, because Mars has tremendous dust storms that destroy everything. In a very short period of time, all of this geological, all of these features would be destroyed. And certainly over 2 billion years, you wouldn't see this.
And the other thing is, of course, that they always show pictures, too, of Mars where they show the sky as red, but in actual fact, if you were on the Martian surface, the sky would appear blue because that's just a principle of light. The second thing is that there probably is water deposits underneath the ground, especially in the polar and subpolar areas, which means if they're going to find any form of life, bacterial or otherwise, they would find it in the subpolar areas where there is some light underground. Yeah,
I like the picture when the most recent lander landed and they showed the landscape. There's all these rounded hills, nice, beautifully rounded hills. It's everything you saw, round pebbles. Everything you saw in that picture was a result of water erosion and the presence of water. But they just can't quite decide if there was water there, you know.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Now, the cataclysm on Earth was pretty significant, and this would also fit in with the flood hypothesis about Noah and the flood, that there were cataclysmic changes to the Earth that occurred around those times as well.
Yeah, the Noah's flood preceded the Velikovsky Venus event was what I call the Moses event.
Right.
And the Quetzalcoatl of the Incas, the Mayas, the ancient Incas and Mayas. But the Noah event happened thousands of years earlier, because the Old Testament of the Bible is nothing more than a genealogy of the people between Noah and Moses.
Right.
And that's all it is. It's the genealogy and the history of that event, of the Great Flood.
Right.
Oddly enough, the Great Flood is not even taught in history in schools today. It's like mythology. Nobody teaches it because they don't think it even happened. And it's one of the most formative events in the history of all of mankind. That shows how distorted education is today.
Yeah, and one of the good theories that I've seen recently is that it was the massive flooding, the dramatic expansion of the Black Sea that occurred when a major barrier broke between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea through the Bosporus, that occurred because of the Earth changes, and that great flood would be accomplished also by great floods from the sky and great Earth changes in the ground because there's fault lines that run right through the Bosporus.
Well, yeah, but The biblical flood was 40 days and 40 nights of torrential rain. And,
right, and that makes sense too, because the plasma discharges would cause rain, wouldn't they, in your theory?
Well, the comet tail, we passed 40 days and 40 nights. I figured that, for example, if we, as planet Earth, passed through the tail of Comet Hale-Bopp, which was a possibility, right. Just say that the orbital situation was correct, we would have spent about 35 days in the comet tail. And then it would have rained, wow. We had torrential rains, the naphtha, the rain of brimstone and fire. And so, at any rate, the Noah's flood is very realistic. We passed through the tail of a big comet, 40 days and 40 nights. And gee, how did Noah know this was going to happen? How did he know to build a boat? Well, because someone back there had the knowledge to know that this thing was coming, and he built his boat out in the middle of nowhere, and people were laughing at him.
Right. He was building in a desert area, basically.
Yeah, and then it started to rain, and I think the people stopped laughing.
Right. Now, what's interesting is a lot of this knowledge is passed down through the ancient, we call high priesthood.
This is probably obvious, but I thought I'd say it anyway. Stars are much bigger and much brighter than planets. So as astronomers, it's fairly easy to study stars. Studying planets, which are not in our own solar system, is rather troublesome because they're small and they're dim, so they're difficult to study. The difference in brightness between the Earth and the Sun is a factor of about 10 billion. So you're looking for something very, very faint next to something much brighter. So that presents obvious problems. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about stars that we're going to need later on. So this is probably the most important diagram in astronomy. This is the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram, and it's a graph of, on the y-axis, the brightness of stars, on the x-axis, the colour of stars. And almost all the stars in our galaxy that create that beautiful pattern of light that you saw in the artist's impression fall along the diagonal stripe up the middle of that diagram. And these are so-called stripe, and there are actually more stars lower down that are smaller, lower mass, fainter and redder. And then as you go up towards the top of that stripe, you've got more massive stars that are bluer and brighter. Okay, one of the things that we've learned in the last 20 years, which I think is really remarkable, is that we now know that there are actually more planets than stars in our galaxy. So when you look at the light in a galaxy, you see the starlight just because the stars are bright. But we've now done enough work on nearby stars in our own galaxy to know that actually, in general, stars do have planets orbiting around them. So there are lots and lots of planets in our galaxy. We don't know about all of them in detail. The assertion that I just made, that there are more planets than stars in the galaxy, is based on statistics. We know of about 2,000 planets in detail, and these have been studied by astronomers over the last 20 years or so. We know of 1,137 planetary systems, or at least we did on the 9th of September. So these numbers are about a month out of date. So we're probably up to about 2,000 planets now, because there's quite a large number of astronomers in the world who are constantly studying, looking for new planets, and there are new announcements coming out every day. So we know in detail of about 2,000 exoplanets orbiting around stars other than the Sun. And so we now know that planets form with stars. There's no special requirement at all. 20 or, well, more than 20 years ago, it was possible still that our own solar system was unique. Something special had happened to the Sun in its early history that created the material that then formed planets. But we now know that planets do generally form with stars. There's no special requirements. So we would expect the other stars, like the Sun, to have planets also orbiting around them. Now, I should probably just tell you a little bit about how we found these almost 2,000 exoplanets that we know about, because I've told you that it's very difficult to see planets because they're dim. So both of the main ways that we've detected these planets depend on actually studying the light from the star and observing in the light from the star subtle effects due to the effect of the planet on the star. So you can actually, you think of planets orbiting around stars, but in fact, from the point of view of the laws of physics, both the star and the planet have mass, and they both orbit around their common center of gravity, which is much closer to the heavier star than it is to the light planet. So the star itself has a little orbit, which you can detect by looking at the light from the star and looking at the Doppler shift of that light. And then there's another even more simple way of detecting a planet around a star, which is if you happen to have a planetary system that's lined up so that the orbit of the planet happens to take the planet right in front of the star from our point of view, then the planet gets in the way and blocks some of the light. So you can actually see the star get dimmer every time a planet gets in front of it. So these are the two main ways that we've detected the almost 2,000 exoplanets that we know about. Okay, so I'm now going to change gear a little bit and go back to a brief history of life on the Earth. So I'm revisiting some of the points that Ian and Dave have already made. So from about 4 billion to 3.8 billion years ago, the Earth was being bombarded in an early period of its history called the Late Heavy Bombardment. It was being bashed into by all sorts of stray bits of rock and asteroids that were chaotically orbiting around in the solar system. So at this point, the Earth was probably not habitable. But the interesting thing is, rather promptly, on astronomical timescales, a mere 300 million years after the Late Heavy Bombardment, we can see evidence that photosynthesis was already happening on the Earth. So that implies that life got started really very quickly after the Late Heavy Bombardment started. So this means that probably you don't require very special circumstances for life. Now, the rather more pessimistic thing is that complex life, of the sort of thing that you and I, trees, cats and dogs, that happened rather late, and this is at the very other extreme of the history of life on Earth. So it was about 600 million years ago that the first very complex life happened. So that may require rather special circumstances. So from analogy with that, it seems that probably life may be common on planets elsewhere in our galaxy, but complex life may be rather rare. Okay, so Dave told us that we need a source of energy and liquid water for life. And I told you about the different kinds of stars. Where you would need to put a planet in order to have liquid life on its surface depends on the type of star you're orbiting around. So the big hot blue stars have a habitable zone that's fairly large and fairly far away. The more plentiful, cool red stars are dimmer, and so you need a planet to be closer in to have a temperature consistent with liquid water. But it's more complicated than that. You can't just put the planet in the habitable zone and say it's going to be a habitable planet. It's much more complex than that. And as we know from our own solar system, the difference between Earth and Venus is dramatic. And it depends, a lot depends on the atmosphere and the clouds, whether you have a dry and toxic environment like Venus or a wet habitable environment like the Earth. So clouds can help as they do on Earth. But if you have too many clouds, they can trap heat and cause a runaway greenhouse effect. So it's really rather complicated to assess whether a planet is habitable or not. In the future, with more powerful telescopes, we may be able to make observations which will allow us to identify individual chemicals in the atmosphere of planets. And this gives us the potential to actually say, is there life now on the surface of this planet that we're observing? So, for example, on the Earth, we have oxygen in our atmosphere. Oxygen is highly reactive, and we only have oxygen in our atmosphere because it's been constantly replenished by the processes in plants on Earth. So if we were to be able to detect oxygen in the atmosphere of an exoplanet, that would be a so-called biomarker and give us a strong steer that perhaps there is in fact life on that planet. Now, finally, I'm going to, as promised, tell you a little bit about some work that we did here at the Open University. So I told you that most of the stars in the galaxy are along that diagonal stripe in this diagram. All of those stars will eventually run out of fuel, and almost all of them will end their lives as white dwarf stars, which are in the bottom corner of that diagram. And those stars are no longer doing nuclear reactions. They're just dying embers that are cooling like coals left over after a fire. And it turns out that planets can survive around compact stellar remnants like that. And surprisingly, the way that white dwarf stars cool actually leads to conditions where you could have habitable temperatures on planets for up to 8 billion years could use to generate energy, while simultaneously not having too much damaging UV radiation. So this is quite a sort of an optimistic, sort of very long-term picture that as all of the stars in the galaxy burn out, we could nonetheless have a galaxy that's teeming with life on planets around white dwarf stars. You know, as we look sort of 10 billion, 20 billion years into the future, the prospects for life in the galaxy are actually rather promising. So, do we have questions? If you have a question, you need to wait for the microphone. Yes, there's one here.
The planets that you're finding on the stars, how far away are the stars from us in light years?
Ah, right. Handily. I happen to have a... so, this is a sort of schematic diagram of our Milky Way galaxy. And there's a scale there in light years, and the distance of our sun from the center of the galaxy is indicated. So the planets that we find, their distance depends on the method used to find them. So there's a little cloud of sort of greenish points there that are clustered quite close to the sun. And those are the ones that have been found by the Doppler technique, where we're looking at the motion of the star caused by the larger motion of the less massive planet. And to do that, you need a fairly bright star because you have to spread the light out very, very widely. So you need a bright star to be able to do that. Then there's a sort of a slightly larger cloud of red points, and those have been found by transit surveys. So at the Open University, we are involved in the SuperWASP project, which has found quite a number of transiting planets. I think we're up to almost 200 now. And those planets are around stars that are slightly more distant from the sun, because you just have to collect all the light from the star to find them. You don't have to do the very precise spectroscopy. And then many more have been discovered by a satellite, by a NASA satellite called Kepler, which pointed in a particular direction and made very precise measurements, again, looking for planets that are getting in the way of the star and causing a transit signal where the light dims. And because it's pointing in a particular direction, it's actually on average looking at fainter stars, so those are dimmer. So I've sort of schematically indicated those with the blue dot. And then there's another method I haven't told you about, which uses gravitational lensing, and that tends to find things just this side of the center of the galaxy. So that's probably a more detailed answer than you wanted. Yeah. Yeah, just wait for the microphone.
Would there be lots of planets going around every one star? Like, how many on average? Would there be like 8 or 9 like in the solar system, or would there be lots more?
That's a really good question, and that's something that astronomers are working on. So we don't really know at this point, because all of our techniques require certain things in order for us to be able to find the planet. So for the transit technique, we need the planet to get in the way. And if you were to look at our own solar system, the planets are aligned more or less in line with each other, but not quite. So there are quite a few systems where there's sort of up to about 5 or 6 transiting planets that have been found in the same system. But you don't really know if there might be some that are just, misaligned a little bit, so they're just missing going in front of the star. And similarly with the Doppler shift technique, you can detect the very massive planets that cause a big wobble easily, but there could be less massive planets in the same system that we're failing to detect. So we do know of systems where there are 5 or more planets, but we're not sure really what the typical number is yet. That's a very good question, and you could probably still research on it, you know, when you're old enough to to do research at university.
Hi, your research looking at the biomarkers for planets with life seems to be based around oxygen levels. If obviously looked at the Earth, you wouldn't see oxygen levels as much with what we're looking at because it's nitrogen based. So are you looking at it with different makeups like nitrogen and carbon dioxide based as well?
Yeah, so what you're doing is you're looking for something that's sort of out of equilibrium, where you've got to have some sort of metabolic process. And I should probably also say that that's not a particular thing that I've worked on. The things that I've worked on are the bits that I picked out, but that's one of the most important general things that people are preparing to do in exoplanet astronomy in the next 10 years or so.
Of modern-day astronomy is comets. Comets make no sense for this reason. They come from all over the place. In a linear universe, when, you know, the great ball of a primordial cloud of dust and gas swirling around flattens out into a pancake to make the solar system, that's the ecliptic. Everything formed in the ecliptic should be in the ecliptic. Nothing should be out of the ecliptic, and yet comets come from all over the place. So they had to be removed out to where they are some kind of way, but we don't have any idea. So they come up with this fantastic thing called the Oort cloud, which is so far away you can't imagine. The Oort cloud is one of the biggest jokes out there. And that's how they explain comets, because they can't explain them any other way. But the problem with comets is they have water in them. And anything out in space is not going to produce water. You produce water by being a cooling planet with lava spewing up the steam and stuff like that, and it condenses, etc. So comets have to begin in a planet.
The energy beam coming through the top of the Bosnian pyramid of the Sun. This right here. This energy beam has a frequency of 28 kilohertz. That's the frequency of the ultrasound, which you cannot hear or see. It's continuous, and it shoots right above us, where we don't know. But we were able to measure it with our instruments, so this phenomenon is here. In today's society, we use ultrasound for the medical purposes, but you always have to have artificial source. It can be mechanical device, electromagnetic device, when you squeeze the quartz crystal, but it's always artificial source. It seems that some of the pyramids in Bosnia have some type of the energy machine. If that's true, it means that in the distant past, they made this machine. It works even today, after thousands of years. This is a machine that never stops. This was more like science fiction in the past, but we have it here in Bosnia. Another measurements we did was the intensity of the energy beam. What we did, we had a team of the physicists from Zagreb, 10 of them. They came with the instruments and they measured the intensity on the surface of the pyramid. And then they measured it 3 meters or 10 feet higher. It was stronger. They measured another 10 feet higher, 20 feet from the bottom of the pyramid, and then it was even stronger. As you move from the center of the pyramid, the energy intensity rises. The energy is getting stronger and stronger. It contradicts all our physical laws. It contradicts our technology, which is based on so-called Hertzian technology, saying that closer to the source, the energy is stronger. In our case, you have something opposite. You're moving away from the source. Energy is getting stronger. It means that if you shoot that energy beam, it's getting stronger as it travels through the universe. It means you can reach any point in the universe. You can connect with any planet or solar system. So we are opening a complete new door in this investigation. And such a powerful, focused energy beam, with its strength and intensity, rising as it moves away from this planet, it's possible to hit any point in the universe. If you can make that energy bridge between two cosmic bodies, then yes, you can transport anything you want. After all, we are only the frequency. Our bodies, they're just the frequency. Our thoughts, they're just the frequency. The stone is the frequency, just different frequencies. And then the vibration can go through that energy bridge. There are different ways for transportation. For example, when you have opera singer making high C, and if you have a glass in front of him, the glass will break. It means that the sound in this particular, it's very possible that people in the past, they had the knowledge how to use different frequencies for different tasks. If it can be proven that you can transport anything, anywhere, then you have the biggest discovery ever.
It then took another 500,000 years before Neanderthal man mastered the concept of stone tools, and a further 50,000 years before crops were cultivated and metallurgy was discovered. Hence, he says, by all scales of evolutionary reckoning, we should still be as far removed from any basic understanding of mathematics, engineering, or science, but here we are, a mere 7,000 years later, landing probes on Mars. And he asked the all-important question, so how did we inherit this wisdom, and from whom? And then, just in case, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but just in case anybody's just straight in off the street and thinks that no alien visitors did ever visit this planet, they better read what Dr. Harrison H. Brown says from CIT. He estimates that virtually every star in our galaxy has a planetary system, in each of which 2 or 4 planets might have an Earth-like environment and chemistry that encourages our kind of life to exist. He gives the enormous figure of 100 billion stars with planets in the Milky Way galaxy alone, and get this, there are 450 billion of those galaxies. That makes you feel small. Good. But we don't have to look to scientists for that. My work is entirely based on the mythologies, of the ancient world, the legends. Oh yeah, they used to say it as old wives' tales, so nobody paid it any mind. But we don't have to look to science to wait to tell us what our forefathers were telling us all along. The scriptures, the apocryphal works, the Gnostic texts. Isaiah 13, they come from a far country, from the end of heaven, to destroy the whole land. Isaiah 6, who are these that fly in a cloud as the doves to their windows? Well, who indeed? They're known by many names all over the culture. Jack Barringer, a researcher in this very subject, who wrote a book called Past Shock, he says that there's at least 30,000 texts. And that's only the texts that are left after all the burnings and purgings. There's still in existence at least 30,000 texts talking about this visitation. And every single culture in the world, almost bar none, reveal them. The Nephilim, the Anakim, the giants, the Titans. The Indians know them as the Nagas. The Irish knew them as the Nadreds, which is a word that means serpent. And more recently, they're known as the Brotherhood of the Snake or the Serpent People. And we'll explain that why, because there's been a lot of disinformation about that from certain people within the research community. We'll clear that one up today, too. The word Nephilim, actually, which is the most common name for these individuals. The etymology of Nephilim is uncertain, but the following explanations have been advanced. First, it may derive from nifal, which is a verb, from the verb to be extraordinary, or the extraordinary men. It may derive from the verb en-napal, which means the fallen ones from heaven. Supernatural beings, you see, although it could mean morally fallen men. Take your pick. The International Standard Bible Encyclopedia defines it as meaning unnaturally begotten men, bastards. From nepel, abortion or miscarriage. Most modern versions of the Bible have left the word untranslated. The word also may come from nephel, which means bad or strange birth, as I said, or from kenephilim, which means the serpents. Now, these so-called fallen angels were extremely scientifically advanced humanoid beings who came to Earth after being forced to exit their own planet or planets. They had been expunged by opposition forces and pursued across the galaxy into our solar system. And some scientists now are thinking that the sun, in the same way that even Frank Herbert was talking about bending space, and using even the sun as an event horizon. The concept is now coming into science through individuals like Nazim Haramein, that the sun is even a black hole by which you can, fly between the galaxies. It's not my forte, but I just want to put that out there. So they arrived into our space, into our solar system. Upon arrival, they set up an unmanned makeshift decoy center on the planet Tiamat, which once existed between Mars and Jupiter, but they actually took refuge on our Earth here, in many of its underground caverns. Tiamat was a vast ocean planet in our solar system, known from antiquity as the second sun. It was 15 times larger than our Earth, and it was an entire ocean planet. An entirely ocean planet. It wasn't a sun, but its atmosphere was so resplendent that the actual sun's rays, when shining on Tiamat, made it appear to people on Earth that it was a sun. And it was known as the second sun from antiquity. If you think that's kind of odd, just remember that Venus is like the second or third brightest orb in the sky and actually casts a shadow on our Earth on a moonless night. And Allen and Dallaire, in their book Cataclysm, these are top scientists from Oxford and Cambridge. I quote them a lot in the Atlantis book, because the science is in, by the way. This is not just some hokomania. The science is in for every single thing that you're hearing today. If we elevate the moon to planetary status, they say, as the Sumerians appear to have done, then we have a total of 10 planets orbiting the sun. Now, if you're into Zechariah 16, this is all old news to you. On this basis, one planet is currently still missing from the earlier Sumerian total. Could there really have been another planet known to the Sumerians, as yet unknown to us or lost since their day? Well, wait a minute, Tiamat ain't there. Well, we do know what lies between Mars and Jupiter is the asteroid belt, right? That's right. Tiamat is not there today because it was destroyed by those pursuers of the Nephilim. This is what distinguishes my findings from Sitchin and from Velikovsky and others who research this field. Wonderful researchers, but I have found out something else, and that is that it was by humanoid. It wasn't some careering comet charging through our solar system. It was actually a humanoid intervention, the destruction of a planet 15 times larger than the Earth, made up entirely of oceans. Your enemy, you must think your enemy is pretty bad if you do that, right? But these guys were so convinced that the Nephilim were on Tiamat, they utterly obliterated, causing the almost unimaginable, magnetic storms and chaos in our universe. That is the event that caused the first flood. Tiamat's waters literally pouring down, and by the way, all the records talk about that. It's not waters coming up from below, it's waters raining down on you from the sky. Well, hell yeah. Do you know, in fact, as Allen and Dallaire have proven, that pre the deluge, pre the flood, we only had one ocean on this planet, and it was called the Miocene Ocean, and the remnants of the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. If you're from Russia or Slovakia or from Estonia and from those Baltic lands, you'll know this, that the Caspian and the Black Sea have an interesting mythology. They're the remnants of the only ocean that we had before the deluge. All that Pacific and Atlantic and Indian Ocean, they're new. They just moved in. They're squatters. In the Babylonian Enuma Elish, we read about it. It says, go and cut off Tiamat's life, and let the winds convey her blood to the secret places. Flowery language, granted. Mythological language, granted. But there it is. Go and cut off Tiamat's life, let the winds convey her blood to the secret places. One of the greatest documents that helps to reveal the whole history of the Nephilim is called the Book of Enoch. It should have been in the Bible, but it didn't get there. And behold, a star fell from heaven, it says, and the children of the earth began to tremble and quake before them and to flee from them. And again I saw how they began to gore each other and to devour each other, and the earth began to cry aloud. Right? Just like Revelation says, a star fell from heaven. Now the Nephilim were not on Tiamat, as I said. They had descended to earth to hide. After the deluge, they emerged and set up their dummy base. Sorry, not their dummy base, but their actual base, known as Atlantis, on the vast continent of Appalachia. Appalachia is now beneath the waters, but it used to be England and Ireland, part of Scandinavia, the Arctic, Greenland and Iceland. You could walk the whole way.
Про неї суворо оберігають і не піддають розголосу. Повторення всесвітнього потопу. Це станеться, якщо Нібіру пройде над одним із полюсів. Крига розтане, і спасіння тонучих – справа рук самих потопельників. Інформацію про Нібіру і досі замовчують. Жодної програми, жодного документального фільму. НАСА не публікує результатів своїх досліджень. Та зараз мовчати вже немає сенсу, і відомості про червону планету спливають на поверхню. А в травні 2012-го її побачать усі неозброєним оком. У вересні того ж року Нібіра буде схожа на друге сонце, тільки червоного кольору. Та найгірше чекає на нас у грудні 2012-го, коли Нібіру наблизиться до Землі на ризиковану дистанцію.
Небесное тело, превышающее размеры Земли в 5 раз, пройдет по орбите в опасной близости от нашей планеты. Сила его притяжения будет настолько мощной, что Земля может поменять наклон. Если это случится, то изменившаяся ось вызовет смену магнитных полюсов. И тогда на планету обрушатся невиданные силы наводнения и извержения вулкана, сметающие все на своем пути смерчи и землетрясения. Это Захария Ситчин, знаменитый американский ученый. В 1978 году Ситчин делает сенсационное заявление. В Солнечной системе вовсе не 9 планет, как считает официальная наука, а 10. По утверждению ученого, кроме всем известных планет, существует еще одна – Нибиру. Она блуждает в космосе по невероятно вытянутой орбите и проходит через Солнечную систему раз в 3600 лет. К теории Захария Ситчина в научном сообществе отнеслись с недоверием. Астрономы не могли поверить в то, чего не видно в космическом пространстве даже в самые мощные телескопы. Однако уже в начале 80-х, после длительных математических вычислений и построения компьютерных моделей, существование планеты Нибиру было доказано.
В 1982 году НАСА допустило существование большой планеты, которой впоследствии было дано название Нибиру.
В 2005 году американские астрофизики заявили, что на расстоянии приблизительно в 1 световой год от Земли располагается огромное космическое тело. Но главное, на огромной скорости оно приближается к нашей планете. Небесное тело настолько темное, что ни оптические телескопы, ни другие приборы не в состоянии его увидеть. Сомнений уже не оставалось. Это Нибиру.
Инфракрасный спутник, который действительно засек объект достаточно больших размеров, и ему удалось этот объект не только засечь, но и как-то зафиксировать, сфотографировать.
После изучения параметров и траектории движения гигантской планеты, ученые пришли к неутешительному выводу. Нибиру больше Земли в 5 раз. Но самое страшное, через 3 года она может пролететь в нескольких сотнях километров от Земли. Находясь так близко к нашей планете, она запросто сможет сорвать с нее атмосферу. Ученые выяснили, что однажды Нибиру уже погубила другую планету. Оказалось, что 16 миллионов лет назад в нашей Солнечной системе существовала планета Фаэтон. Она располагалась между Марсом и Юпитером. Теперь на ее месте пояс астероидов. Ученые считают этот пояс не что иное, как осколки древней планеты. По словам астрофизиков, скорее всего, Нибиру столкнулась с Фаэтоном, когда она в очередной раз проходила через Солнечную систему. После такого удара планета разлетелась на куски. По словам ученых, правительство просто скрывает от человечества правду, чтобы не вызывать панику.
Представители всех военных разведок мира эту информацию о том, что Нибиру может принести значительный ущерб, урон, разрушение и даже гибель жителей Земли, имеют. А не разглашается эта информация и не становится достоянием общественности только лишь потому, что НАСА и все эти структуры хотят спасти достойных представителей Земли, спасти всех, они...
4 times larger than Jupiter. It dwarfs Jupiter and the Earth, as you see in this illustration.